Michael Harrison dropped his phone, the device clattering across his marble office floor as his coffee mug shattered against the window. The shelter worker's words echoed in his mind like a death knell. "We found your father's military dog, sir, but according to his tags, Colonel Harrison died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Not Denver, like you told us." Sarah Martinez's voice had cracked with confusion. "The dog's been sitting by Highway 6 for weeks, Mr. Harrison. Just waiting. Like he knows something we don't." Michael's hands trembled as he stared at the family photo on his desk. His father in dress blues. No mention of any dog, no hint of Afghanistan deployment after retirement. The old man had died peacefully in his sleep, hadn't he? "Sir?" Sarah's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. "Should I call the police, or—" What secrets had his father taken to the grave? And why was a German shepherd holding the key to unraveling everything Michael thought he knew about the most important man in his life? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Michael Harrison had built his empire on precision and control, transforming a garage startup into Harrison Technologies, now valued at $2.3 billion. At 45, he commanded boardrooms with the same authority his father had once commanded soldiers, yet something fundamental remained hollow in his perfectly orchestrated life. The penthouse office overlooking downtown Denver showcased his achievements. Awards lining mahogany shelves, framed magazine covers proclaiming him Tech Visionary of the Year, but the space felt more like a monument to ambition than a home. 3 years had passed since Colonel James Harrison's funeral, a service Michael had attended between conference calls, his mind split between grief and a merger deadline. His father had been a decorated Vietnam veteran who spent his retirement years counseling other veterans at the VA hospital, earning quiet respect throughout Denver's military community. Michael remembered him as a man of few words but deep convictions, someone who measured success not in dollars but in lives touched and duties fulfilled. The irony wasn't lost on Michael that while his father had dedicated his life to bringing broken soldiers home, Michael had spent his adult years running from anything that reminded him of that world. Military precision felt suffocating compared to Silicon Valley's chaos. Traditional values seemed outdated in an industry that worshipped disruption. The generational divide had grown into a chasm, with conversations becoming increasingly strained during their final years together. Michael's corner office windows revealed the Rocky Mountains in the distance, the same peaks his father had gazed upon during his final months. The old man had lived alone in a modest ranch house near the foothills, declining Michael's repeated offers to move somewhere more luxurious. "A soldier doesn't abandon his post," Colonel Harrison had said with characteristic stubbornness, referring to the home where he'd raised his son after Michael's mother died in a car accident when Michael was 12. The penthouse felt especially empty today, filled with the hum of servers and the distant chatter of his engineering team developing the next revolutionary app. Michael had scheduled back-to-back meetings through midnight, the familiar rhythm of corporate warfare that had defined his existence for 2 decades. Success had come at a price he was only beginning to calculate. No wife, no children, no real friends outside the office, just the hollow satisfaction of quarterly earnings reports and industry accolades. His assistant knocked softly before entering with the afternoon's priority calls, but Michael waved her away, still processing the impossible call from Rocky Mountain Animal Rescue. How could his father have had a military service dog? Why would the animal's identification tags claim Colonel Harrison died in Afghanistan when Michael himself had watched his father's casket lowered into Denver soil? The questions multiplied like code errors, each answer seeming to corrupt the data he thought he understood about his own family. The autumn afternoon sun cast long shadows across his office as Michael reached for his car keys, knowing that whatever waited for him at that shelter would fundamentally alter everything he believed about the man who had shaped his life from a distance. The Rocky Mountain Animal Rescue sat 30 miles outside Denver, a sprawling complex of weathered buildings nestled against the foothills where autumn aspens painted the landscape in brilliant gold. Michael's Tesla felt out of place in the gravel parking lot beside rusted pickup trucks and aging sedans, symbols of the working-class community that surrounded this sanctuary for abandoned animals. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and the distant sound of barking, a symphony of hope and heartbreak that made his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. Sarah Martinez emerged from the main building before Michael could even turn off his engine. She was younger than her voice had suggested, perhaps 34, with calloused hands and eyes that held the particular sadness of someone who had seen too much suffering. Her husband's memorial bracelet caught the afternoon light. Another military widow, Michael realized, someone who understood loss in ways his privileged existence had never required. "Mr. Harrison?" she asked, extending a firm handshake. "I'm sorry for the confusion earlier. We've never had a situation quite like this one." Her voice carried the gentle authority of someone accustomed to delivering difficult news to grieving families. "Before we go any further, I need to warn you, Sargent isn't just any dog. He's been through something traumatic and we're not entirely sure what." The shelter's interior was clean, but institutional, filled with the controlled chaos of dozens of animals waiting for second chances. Volunteers moved between kennels with practiced efficiency, their conversations punctuated by the occasional bark or whimper. Sarah led Michael toward the back section, past puppies and young dogs whose energy filled the air with optimism, toward the quieter area reserved for senior animals whose chances of adoption diminished with each passing day. "We found him 6 weeks ago," Sarah explained as they walked, her voice dropping to match the more somber atmosphere of this section. "Highway Patrol called us about a German Shepherd wandering the mountain roads like he was searching for something. When we scanned his microchip, the information didn't match any of our databases. The address was an old VA facility that's been closed for years." She paused outside a large kennel at the end of the corridor, her expression growing more serious. "Sargent, that's what we've been calling him based on his tags. He's been exhibiting some unusual behaviors. He sits at attention every day at exactly 3:47 p.m., and he won't eat unless someone gives him a direct command. Our veterinarian thinks he might be a retired military working dog." Michael's breath caught as he approached the kennel. Inside, a magnificent German Shepherd sat with perfect military posture, his intelligent blue eyes, an unusual trait for the breed, fixed directly on Michael with an intensity that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone to something deeper. The dog's coat was graying around the muzzle, and multiple scars crisscrossed his face and legs, telling stories of battles Michael could only imagine. "Those are bullet scars," Sarah said quietly, following Michael's gaze. "And this." She pointed to a long mark across the dog's left flank. "Shrapnel, according to our vet. This dog has seen combat, Mr. Harrison. Real combat." The German Shepherd rose slowly, his movements careful but dignified, and approached the kennel door. When their eyes met, Michael felt a jolt of recognition that defied logic. This animal knew him, or knew something about him, in a way that transcended their first meeting. Sargent's tail remained still, but his ears were alert, and those remarkable blue eyes never wavered from Michael's face. "The strangest part," Sarah continued, unlocking the kennel door, "is what we found sewn into his collar." She produced a small, weatherproof pouch that had been carefully hidden beneath the leather. "We almost missed it during his intake examination." Michael's hands shook as he accepted the pouch. Inside was a Purple Heart medal, its ribbon faded but the metal still gleaming, and beneath it an encrypted USB drive no larger than his thumb. But it was the photograph that made his knees nearly buckle, his father in full military gear standing beside this same German shepherd against a backdrop of Afghan mountains, both of them looking directly into the camera with expressions of grim determination. The timestamp on the photo read March 15, 2019, exactly 6 months before his father's death in Denver. According to everything Michael knew, Colonel Harrison had been retired for over a decade by then, spending his days at the VA hospital counseling other veterans. The contradiction hit him like a physical blow, reshaping everything he thought he understood about his father's final years. Sargent stepped out of the kennel with measured grace and sat directly in front of Michael, his posture speaking of years of military discipline. The dog's eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human, as if he were waiting for Michael to ask the right questions to prove himself worthy of whatever secrets he carried. "Sir?" Sarah's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Michael stared at the photograph again, his successful businessman's mind struggling to process information that didn't fit any logical framework. His father had lied to him, the military had lied to him, and somehow this scarred German shepherd held the key to understanding why. The encrypted USB drive felt like a live grenade in Michael's hands as he sat in his father's study that evening, Sargent lying motionless at his feet. The German shepherd had followed him home without hesitation, moving through the ranch house with the confidence of someone returning to familiar territory. Every few minutes, the dog would lift his head and stare at the computer screen, as if urging Michael to unlock whatever truth lay hidden in the digital vault his father had left behind. Michael's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. His father had been a man of absolute honesty, or so he'd believed. The thought that Colonel James Harrison might have lived a double life during his final years felt like discovering a stranger had been wearing his father's face. The study remained exactly as it had been 3 years ago, filled with military commendations, faded photographs from Vietnam, and the leather chair where his father had spent countless hours reading military history and writing letters to Gold Star families. The encryption proved surprisingly sophisticated for a man who had struggled with email. Michael tried obvious passwords, birthdays, service dates, family names, but each attempt resulted in the same mocking error message. Sargent suddenly rose and padded to the bookshelf, placing his paws against a particular volume. The Art of War by Sun Tzu. When Michael pulled the book down, a piece of paper fell to the floor with a single word written in his father's careful handwriting: loyalty. The USB drive unlocked with a soft chime, revealing a folder structure that told its own story. Files labeled Operation Guardian Angel, Classified Correspondence, and Final Message for Michael Only filled the screen. Michael's mouth went dry as he realized the scope of whatever his father had been involved in during those final months. These weren't the activities of a retired veteran counseling other soldiers. This was active intelligence work. He clicked on the final message first, his father's familiar face filling the screen against the backdrop of what appeared to be a military tent. Colonel Harrison looked older than Michael remembered, weathered by something beyond ordinary aging. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and new lines mapped a geography of stress across his features. "Son, if you're watching this, then I didn't make it home from Afghanistan," his father's voice said, each word carefully measured. "I know you think I've been retired, living quietly, wasting away my final years. The truth is more complicated than that. I've been working with a joint task force on humanitarian missions, unofficial ones that couldn't appear on any government record." Michael paused the video, his mind reeling. Afghanistan. His father had been in Afghanistan while Michael was closing deals and attending board meetings, completely oblivious to the danger his father faced daily. The guilt hit him like a physical blow. All those months when he'd been too busy to visit, too focused on quarterly projections to notice his father's increasingly distant demeanor during their brief phone conversations. Sargent was my partner on 7 missions, the video continued. He's not just a dog, Michael. He's a witness to things that certain people would kill to keep buried. If something happens to me, they'll come for him next. The dog knows where the bodies are buried, literally and figuratively. A chill ran down Michael's spine as Sargent rose and moved to the window, his body tense with the alertness of a sentry scanning for threats. The dog's behavior suddenly made perfect sense. This wasn't a pet struggling with separation anxiety. This was a combat veteran maintaining operational security, protecting classified information that someone had already killed to suppress. The video revealed more devastating truths. His father had discovered a trafficking ring using military transport routes to smuggle children out of Afghanistan, selling them to the highest bidders across Europe and North America. The rescue missions had been personal crusades, unauthorized operations that put his father at odds with his own chain of command and made him powerful enemies in both military and criminal circles. "I've documented everything," Colonel Harrison's image continued. "Names, dates, photographs, financial records. Sargent wears a secondary collar underneath his regular one. You'll need bolt cutters to remove it. Inside, you'll find evidence that could bring down this entire network. But Michael, once you see what's in there, you can't unsee it. And you'll become a target, just like I did." The recording ended with his father's final words. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth while I was alive. I thought I was protecting you from this world. Take care of Sargent. He's earned his retirement. And if you choose to finish what I started, remember that some fights are worth everything, even if you lose everything fighting them." Michael sat in stunned silence as the implications crashed over him like an avalanche. His father hadn't died peacefully in his sleep. He'd been murdered for trying to save trafficked children. The official death certificate was a lie, the funeral a charade, and Sargent was the only living witness to whatever had really happened in those final months. The German Shepherd approached Michael's chair and placed his massive head on his knee, those piercing blue eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that seemed to communicate volumes. This dog had watched his father die. This dog knew who was responsible. And now, this dog was looking to Michael for justice that might never come through official channels. Michael's phone buzzed with messages from his assistant about tomorrow's IPO launch meeting, the culmination of 5 years of preparation that would make him one of the youngest billionaires in Colorado. The contrast felt obscene. While he'd been building his digital empire, his father had been fighting a war most people didn't even know existed, saving children whose names would never appear in any history book. As if sensing Michael's internal conflict, Sargent moved to the safe hidden behind his father's desk and sat at attention, waiting. The dog knew the combination somehow, or knew that Michael would need whatever was stored inside. The choice loomed before him like a crossroads. Continue living the comfortable lie of his father's peaceful death, or open that safe and discover truths that would change everything he thought he knew about honor, duty, and the price of doing what's right. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, and Michael realized that whether he was ready or not, the war his father had died fighting was about to become his inheritance. Michael's first week with Sargent shattered every assumption he'd held about both dogs and himself. The German Shepherd moved through the ranch house with military precision, conducting what appeared to be security sweeps every morning at dawn, checking windows, doors, and sight lines with the thoroughness of a trained operative. When Michael tried to establish normal pet routines, food bowls on the floor, casual walks around the neighborhood, Sargent simply sat at attention and waited for proper commands in what Michael eventually realized was German. The learning curve proved humiliating for a man accustomed to mastering complex technologies within days. Sargent would only eat when commanded "Futter nehmen," would only lie down with Platz, and showed no interest in typical dog toys or activities. Instead, he spent hours studying the ranch house's layout, memorizing escape routes and defensive positions that suggested his training went far beyond standard military working dog protocols. Dr. Patricia Chen, the veterinarian recommended by Sarah Martinez, confirmed Michael's growing suspicions during Sargent's comprehensive examination. "This dog has been trained for special operations," she explained, running her hands along scars that told stories of combat Michael could barely comprehend. "See these marks on his legs? Training scars from obstacle courses. And this?" She pointed to a barely visible tattoo inside Sargent's ear. "That's a DOD classification number. Your father's dog was part of an elite unit." The physical examination revealed damage that broke Michael's heart. Shrapnel fragments remained embedded in Sargent's left shoulder, too close to vital organs to remove safely. His hearing had been damaged by explosions, explaining why he responded better to hand signals than voice commands. Most devastating of all, X-rays showed evidence of previous torture. Deliberately broken ribs that had healed improperly, burned scars hidden beneath his thick coat. "Someone tried to break him," Dr. Chen said quietly, her professional composure cracking slightly. "But German Shepherds are incredibly resilient. This dog survived because he had a mission to complete." Michael's corporate world began unraveling the moment he stepped away from Harrison Technologies to care for Sargent. His business partner, Derek Morrison, called emergency board meetings questioning Michael's fitness to lead. "The man is having a breakdown over a dog," Derek told investors during a conference call Michael wasn't invited to join. "This is exactly the kind of emotional instability that destroys companies during critical transitions." The IPO, scheduled for the following month, represented 5 years of preparation and the financial security of 300 employees. Michael's absence during crucial investor meetings sent ripples of concern through the tech community. Stock analysts began questioning whether Harrison Technologies could maintain its innovative edge without its visionary founder's full attention. But Michael found himself caring less about market projections and more about understanding the dog who had become his unexpected responsibility. Sargent's daily routine revealed a creature still following orders from a commander who would never return. Every afternoon at 3:47 p.m., Sargent would position himself by the front window and maintain watch until sunset, his body tense with anticipation that would never be fulfilled. The breakthrough came during their second week together when Michael discovered his father's hidden office in the ranch house basement. Sargent had led him there deliberately, descending the stairs with the confidence of familiarity. Behind a false wall, Michael found a command center that would have impressed any intelligence agency. Maps of Afghanistan marked with operation sites, encrypted communication equipment, and photographs of children whose faces held stories of unimaginable trauma. One photograph stopped Michael cold, his father and Sargent posing with 23 Afghan children outside what appeared to be a rescue compound. The children's eyes held the hollow look of those who had seen too much, but they clung to Colonel Harrison and Sargent with desperate gratitude. A handwritten note on the back read, "Operation Guardian Angel, Mission 7. All 23 confirmed safe at extraction point." Cost: everything. The financial records hidden in his father's files told their own devastating story. Colonel Harrison had liquidated his entire retirement account, $340,000 accumulated over 30 years of military service, to fund these unauthorized rescue missions. He'd mortgaged the ranch house twice, sold family heirlooms, and borrowed against his life insurance policy to purchase equipment, safe houses, and transportation for trafficking victims. Michael's hands trembled as he discovered invoices for medical care, psychological counseling, and relocation expenses for dozens of rescued children. His father had been operating an underground railroad for human trafficking victims, using his own money and risking court-martial with every mission. The man Michael had dismissed as a simple veteran counselor had been running one of the most effective anti-trafficking operations in the region. The encrypted files revealed the scope of the network his father had been fighting. Names of high-ranking military officials, politicians, and business leaders formed a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government. Michael recognized several names from Denver's social elite, men who sat on charity boards and gave speeches about protecting children while simultaneously profiting from their exploitation. Sargent's role in these operations became clear through mission reports written in his father's precise military style. The dog had been trained not just for combat, but for victim identification and evidence recovery. His keen senses could detect human scent trails days old, locate hidden compartments where children were concealed, and identify specific individuals through scent recognition that surpassed any electronic surveillance system. "Sargent saved more lives than any soldier I commanded," one file noted. "His loyalty isn't just to me, it's to the mission. If something happens to me, he'll continue the work with whoever proves worthy of the responsibility." The weight of that responsibility crushed down on Michael as he realized why Sargent had been found on Highway 6, heading toward the mountains. The dog hadn't been wandering aimlessly. He'd been trying to complete his final mission, following protocols ingrained through years of training to seek help when his handler was compromised. Dr. Chen's follow-up examination revealed the full extent of Sargent's decline. The stress of losing his handler, combined with the physical toll of his combat injuries, had triggered a rapid deterioration that could prove fatal within weeks. "Military working dogs often die of broken hearts when they lose their handlers," she explained. "Their sense of purpose is so tied to their partnership that they can't adapt to civilian life." Michael faced an impossible choice as he sat in his father's hidden office, surrounded by evidence of heroism he'd never suspected and a legacy he'd never wanted. Sargent lay beside him, breathing labored but eyes alert, waiting for orders from a new commander who barely understood the scope of the war they'd inherited. The phone rang upstairs, Derek Morrison demanding immediate answers about the IPO timeline. Downstairs, files full of trafficking victims' photographs seemed to whisper urgent pleas for justice. And between them, a dying German shepherd who held the key to finishing the most important work Colonel James Harrison had ever undertaken. Michael Harrison, tech entrepreneur, was about to discover that some inheritances can't be refused, and some battles must be fought regardless of the cost. The climax arrived with the violence of a mountain storm shattering the fragile peace Michael had built around his new life with Sargent. It began with a phone call at 4:23 a.m. from Sarah Martinez, her voice tight with fear. "Mr. Harrison, someone broke into the shelter last night. They didn't take any animals. They were looking for something specific. I think they were looking for whatever Sargent was hiding." Michael bolted upright in bed, instantly alert. Beside him, Sargent was already standing, ears erect, body coiled for action. The dog's military training had kicked in the moment the phone rang, and he was scanning the room for threats with the intensity of a soldier expecting incoming fire. "Are you hurt?" Michael asked Sarah, pulling on clothes with one hand while keeping the phone pressed to his ear. "I'm fine, but they destroyed the kennel where Sargent was staying. Michael, they knew exactly which cage to target." "This wasn't random vandalism. Someone knows you found him." Her voice carried the weight of understanding that they had crossed into dangerous territory. "There's something else. I found a note left on my desk. It says, 'The dog dies or you all do.'" The threat crystallized everything Michael had been trying to avoid since discovering his father's secret files. This wasn't just about honoring a dead man's memory. Active forces were still working to bury the truth, and they would kill anyone who stood in their way. As he hung up the phone, Michael realized that taking Sargent home hadn't rescued the dog from danger. It had brought the war to his doorstep. Sargent moved to the bedroom window and assumed a guard position, his body language communicating imminent threat. The dog's behavior triggered something primal in Michael, a survival instinct he'd never needed in boardrooms and conference calls. He grabbed his father's service pistol from the bedroom safe, surprised by how naturally the weapon felt in his hands, as if some genetic memory was awakening. The house's security system had been disabled, professionally, quietly, by someone who understood electronic surveillance. Michael's blood ran cold as he realized they weren't alone. Sargent's low growl confirmed what the silence had already whispered. Intruders were in the house, moving with the patience of professionals who had done this before. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. Armed men in tactical gear burst through the front door, back patio, and basement entrance with military precision. These weren't street criminals. They moved like soldiers, communicated through hand signals, and knew exactly what they were seeking. "Surrender the dog and the files," their leader commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Michael found himself pressed against the study wall, his father's pistol feeling inadequate against their automatic weapons, but Sargent transformed before his eyes from aging pet to elite warrior, moving with a speed and lethality that defied his 12 years. The dog's training engaged like a switch being flipped. He disabled the first intruder with surgical precision, going for the weapon hand before targeting pressure points that dropped the man unconscious in seconds. "That's a military working dog," the team leader hissed into his radio. "We need tranquilizer guns, not bullets. The dog is too valuable to kill." This confirmation that Sargent himself was a target added another layer of complexity to the situation. These men weren't just trying to recover evidence. They wanted the dog alive for reasons Michael didn't yet understand. The battle moved through the house like a deadly game of chess, with Sargent using his knowledge of the layout to outmaneuver attackers who had expected to face an ordinary civilian and his pet. Michael watched in amazement as the dog executed maneuvers that seemed choreographed, using furniture as shields, creating diversions, and protecting Michael with the devotion of a soldier covering his commanding officer. During a brief lull in the violence, Michael accessed his father's encrypted files on his laptop, desperate to understand what was worth killing for. The answer appeared in a folder labeled Operation Nightingale. Photographs and videos of high-ranking officials participating in human trafficking auctions. Faces he recognized from Denver's social elite, men who had attended his father's funeral with expressions of solemn respect, were captured in moments of unspeakable depravity. Senator Richard Blackwood, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, appeared in multiple photographs selecting children from lineups like livestock. General Patricia Hayes, who had delivered his father's eulogy, was recorded negotiating prices for victims destined for private collectors. The evidence wasn't just damning, it was nuclear, capable of destroying careers, ending political dynasties, and triggering investigations that would reach the highest levels of government. "Now you understand why your father had to die," a voice said from the doorway. Michael turned to see David Kowalski emerging from the shadows, no longer the grieving family friend, but revealed as something far more sinister. James was going to expose Operation Nightingale. He didn't understand that some secrets are too big to reveal. Sargent positioned himself between Michael and David, his body language shifting to pure aggression. The dog's reaction confirmed what Michael's instincts were screaming. David Kowalski hadn't been his father's friend. He'd been his executioner. "The pills weren't medicine," David continued, his voice carrying the casual tone of someone discussing weather rather than murder. "Slow-acting poison, untraceable after 72 hours. James trusted me with his coffee every morning for 3 weeks. Never suspected his old unit commander would be the one to put him down." The revelation hit Michael like a physical blow. His father's peaceful death had been a fabrication. He'd been systematically poisoned by someone he'd trusted with his life. The image of his father weakening gradually, attributed to natural aging, now revealed itself as methodical assassination. "Why?" Michael managed to whisper, his voice raw with grief and rage. "Because James forgot the first rule of military service," David replied. "You follow orders, or you become a casualty." He chose to become a casualty. Sargent lunged without warning, but David was ready with a tranquilizer gun that sent the dog crashing to the floor in mid-attack. Michael screamed, rushing to Sargent's side as the dog's breathing became shallow and labored. "You've got 30 minutes before the drugs stop his heart," David said clinically. "Give me the files and I'll give you the antidote. Refuse, and you'll watch your father's dog die the same way your father did. Slowly, helplessly, knowing you could have saved him." The choice crystallized with brutal clarity. Save Sargent and let his father's killers escape justice, or honor his father's mission and watch the last link to his legacy die in his arms. Michael cradled Sargent's head, feeling the dog's heart beating weakly against his chest, and realized that everything he thought he knew about courage, loyalty, and love was about to be tested in ways his privileged life had never prepared him for. Through the window he could see more vehicles approaching, David's backup team arriving to clean up loose ends. Michael Harrison, who had spent his adult life avoiding conflict and controversy, was about to discover what his father had always known. Some fights choose you, and the only real choice is whether you'll face them with honor or surrender with shame. The antidote worked, but Sargent's recovery revealed a truth more devastating than Michael could have imagined. As the German shepherd's breathing stabilized and his eyes regained their sharp intelligence, Dr. Chen delivered news that shattered what remained of Michael's world. "The tranquilizer wasn't meant to kill him," she said quietly, studying the blood work results with a frown that deepened by the moment. "It was designed to trigger something already in his system. Mr. Harrison, Sargent has been slowly dying for months." The veterinary report painted a picture of systematic poisoning that mirrored his father's death. Someone had been dosing Sargent with the same slow-acting toxin that had killed Colonel Harrison, but in smaller amounts designed to cause gradual organ failure rather than immediate death. "Whoever did this wanted Sargent weak and compliant, not dead," Dr. Chen explained. "A sick dog draws less attention than a healthy one, and sick dogs rarely survive long enough to become problems for their enemies." Michael's hands shook as he processed the implications. David Kowalski hadn't just murdered his father, he'd been slowly killing Sargent for 3 years, waiting for the dog to die quietly in some shelter where his death would be attributed to old age and neglect. The cruelty of it staggered Michael, letting a loyal military dog suffer for years while systematically destroying his health, turning his final years into a prolonged execution. The worst part was realizing how close the plan had come to succeeding. If Sarah Martinez hadn't called, if Michael hadn't decided to take responsibility for his father's dog, Sargent would have died forgotten and unmourned, taking his secrets to a pauper's grave in some rural animal cemetery. The traffickers would have eliminated their last witness without anyone ever knowing a crime had been committed. Dr. Chen's prognosis offered little hope. The damage to his liver and kidneys is extensive. Even with aggressive treatment, we're looking at weeks, not months. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison. If you'd found him 6 months earlier, we might have had a chance." Michael sat beside Sargent's recovery cage, watching the dog's labored breathing and seeing his father's face in those blue eyes. The German shepherd had been carrying this burden alone for 3 years, slowly dying while waiting for someone to care enough to listen to what he was trying to communicate. The loyalty was heartbreaking. Even as poison coursed through his system, Sargent had maintained his post, protecting evidence that could save countless children. The financial devastation of Michael's life accelerated alongside Sargent's decline. Derek Morrison had used Michael's absence to execute a carefully planned corporate coup, convincing the board that their CEO's obsession with a dying dog represented a fundamental breakdown in judgment. Emergency shareholders' meetings were called, votes of no confidence were scheduled, and within 72 hours, Michael found himself effectively locked out of the company he had built from nothing. "You chose a dog over a $2 billion business," Derek said during their final confrontation in what had been Michael's office. "Your father would be ashamed of what you've become, a failure who throws away everything for emotional nonsense." The words cut deeper than Derek could have known. Michael had spent his entire adult life trying to prove himself worthy of his father's respect, building financial success as a monument to his own competence. Now, watching that empire crumble while he cared for a dying dog, he wondered if Derek was right, if he was dishonoring his father's memory through weakness and sentimentality. But Sargent's condition continued deteriorating despite the veterinary team's best efforts. The dog refused to eat, barely responded to commands, and spent long hours staring at the mountains visible through the clinic windows. Dr. Chen confided that she'd seen this before in military working dogs. They could literally die of heartbreak when they felt their mission had failed. "He's not just mourning your father," she observed during one particularly difficult night when Sargent's vital signs crashed twice. "He's mourning his inability to complete whatever task your father assigned him. Military dogs need purpose more than they need food or comfort." The realization hit Michael like lightning. Sargent wasn't dying because of the poison. He was dying because he believed he'd failed his final mission. The dog was carrying guilt that matched Michael's own, a burden of responsibility that was killing him from the inside. They were both drowning in the shame of not being enough for Colonel James Harrison. Michael's own health began failing under the stress. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours consecutively in weeks, surviving on hospital vending machine coffee and the adrenaline of desperation. His reflection in the clinic bathroom mirror showed a stranger, hollow-eyed, unshaven, wearing the same clothes for the third day running. He was becoming his father's ghost, consumed by a mission he didn't fully understand but couldn't abandon. The breaking point came when Dr. Chen gently suggested that continuing treatment might be prolonging Sargent's suffering rather than helping him heal. "Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let them go peacefully," she said, her voice heavy with professional compassion. "He's fought long enough." Michael found himself facing the same impossible choice his father must have confronted in Afghanistan: sacrifice everything for a mission that might not succeed, or accept defeat and live with the knowledge that he could have done more. The difference was that his father had been surrounded by fellow soldiers who understood the stakes. Michael was alone, watching his father's partner slip away while the world labeled him crazy for caring. That night, as Sargent's breathing became increasingly labored, Michael made a decision that would have terrified him weeks earlier. He opened his father's mission files on his laptop and began reading them aloud to the dying dog, sharing details of every rescue, every child saved, every victory achieved through their partnership. With each story, Sargent's ears would perk slightly, his tail would move just enough to suggest recognition. "Operation Desert Rose," Michael read, his voice cracking with emotion. "You and Dad saved 14 girls from a trafficking compound outside Kandahar. The youngest was only 7 years old. She drew this picture for you." He showed Sargent a child's crayon drawing of a big dog with blue eyes labeled "My Hero" in careful English letters. For the first time in days, Sargent's tail wagged weakly. The dog's eyes fixed on Michael with renewed focus, as if finally recognizing something familiar in this stranger who had inherited his care. But even as they achieved this moment of connection, Michael could feel time running out, measured in heartbeats that were growing fainter with each passing hour. The tragedy wasn't just that Sargent was dying, it was that he was dying before completing his mission, taking with him the only testimony that could bring justice for his father's murder and the children who were still being trafficked by the network Colonel Harrison had fought to expose. The truth exploded into Michael's world like shrapnel, each revelation more devastating than the last. It began when Dr. Eleanor Webb appeared at the veterinary clinic at midnight, her elderly frame trembling with a burden she could no longer carry alone. Michael had never seen her before, but Sargent's reaction was immediate and profound. The dying dog struggled to stand at attention, his tail wagging weakly in recognition of someone who represented hope rather than threat. "I was your father's psychiatrist for 15 years, Dr. Webb said without preamble, her voice carrying the weight of decades spent listening to unspeakable confessions. "And I need to tell you the truth about how he really died, because what David Kowalski told you was only half the story." Michael's blood turned to ice water. "What do you mean, half the story?" Dr. Webb sat heavily in the plastic chair beside Sargent's recovery cage, her arthritic hands shaking as she opened a worn leather briefcase. "Your father wasn't murdered, Michael. He was dying anyway. The same poison that's killing Sargent was already in James's system for 6 months before David ever gave him those final doses." The elderly psychiatrist's words rewrote everything Michael thought he understood about his father's death. James discovered the trafficking network through his counseling work at the VA. Military contractors were using PTSD-damaged veterans as disposable assets, forcing them to transport cargo they didn't understand. When these broken soldiers finally realized they'd been smuggling children, most of them committed suicide rather than live with the guilt. She pulled out a thick medical file, its pages yellowed with age and stained with what looked like tears. "Your father came to me in January 2019, already showing symptoms of the same poison that had killed 3 other veterans who'd tried to expose the network. He knew he was dying, Michael." "David didn't kill him. David was trying to save him." The revelation hit Michael like a physical blow. His entire understanding of his father's final months inverted in an instant, transforming murder into mercy, betrayal into desperate friendship. But the poison was administered by the network's medical assets within the VA system itself. Dr. Webb continued, her voice growing stronger as she unburdened herself of years of secrecy. "James was being slowly eliminated along with anyone else who got too close to the truth. David discovered the plot and tried to counteract the poison with his own medications. But he was too late. The damage was irreversible." Michael's mind reeled as he processed the implications. David Kowalski hadn't been his father's killer. He'd been his father's closest ally in the final months, desperately trying to save a friend while completing the mission that was costing both their lives. The hatred Michael had been nursing for weeks transformed into something more complex and infinitely more painful: understanding. "Your father made David promise 2 things, Dr. Webb continued, pulling out a handwritten letter in his father's familiar script. "First, to make sure Sargent survived long enough to deliver the evidence to you. Second, to let you believe David was the villain if it kept you safe from the real killers." She handed Michael the letter, its opening lines destroying the last foundations of his anger. "Michael, if you're reading this, then David has sacrificed his reputation to protect you the way I couldn't protect him. The man you're learning to hate is the only reason you're still alive to hate him." The letter revealed the true scope of his father's final mission. Operation Guardian Angel hadn't been about individual rescues. It had been about documenting a systematic network that reached into the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. The evidence Sargent carried wasn't just proof of trafficking, it was documentation of treason by officials sworn to protect American interests abroad. "David has been living under death threats for 3 years, Dr. Webb explained. "He couldn't contact you directly without putting you in danger, so he arranged for Sargent to be abandoned where Sarah Martinez would find him. Sarah's husband was killed trying to expose the same network. She's been protecting Sargent without knowing it." Michael felt his world view reshaping itself like molten metal cooling into new forms. The conspiracy wasn't just about trafficking, it was about silencing veterans who had discovered that their own government was complicit in the crimes they'd been sent to fight. His father and David had been trying to protect not just Afghan children, but American soldiers who were being used as unwitting accomplices. Sargent struggled to his feet and padded slowly to Michael's side, placing his massive head against his leg. The dog's breathing was still labored, but his eyes held a clarity that suggested understanding. Somehow, Sargent knew that the truth was finally being revealed, that his 3-year vigil was reaching its conclusion. Dr. Webb produced a second USB drive from her briefcase. This contains everything your father wanted you to know, including his final video message, the real one, not the decoy he created to protect David's cover. James knew he was dying, but he also knew that exposing the network would require someone with resources and connections beyond what he could provide as a retired colonel. The true final message showed his father in the final stages of poisoning, his body clearly failing but his mind still sharp with purpose. "Son, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth while I was alive. The network we've been fighting reaches too high, involves too many people who could destroy you with a phone call. But if you're watching this, it means you've proven yourself worthy of the responsibility." Colonel Harrison's image leaned closer to the camera, his eyes holding the same intensity Michael had seen in Sargent's gaze. The children in those files aren't just victims. They're witnesses. Some are still alive, hidden in safe houses across 3 continents. Sargent knows how to find them. The evidence you need to bring down the entire network is stored in locations only he can identify. Michael's breath caught as the full magnitude of his inheritance became clear. This wasn't just about avenging his father's death or saving a dying dog. It was about completing a mission that could rescue hundreds of trafficking victims and bring justice to some of the most powerful criminals in the world. But the price of that justice was written in Sargent's labored breathing and Dr. Webb's haunted eyes. Everyone who had tried to fight this network had paid with their lives, their sanity, or their souls. Michael looked down at Sargent, seeing in those blue eyes not just his father's partner, but a fellow soldier waiting for orders from a commanding officer who had never wanted to go to war. The weight of decision pressed down on him like the mountain air outside the clinic windows. He could walk away, let Sargent die peacefully, and return to what remained of his civilian life. Or he could pick up his father's weapon and finish a fight that had already cost him everything he thought he wanted. Sargent's paw touched his hand gently, and Michael understood that the dog wasn't just waiting for a decision, he was offering partnership in whatever came next. The conclusion came not with the violence Michael had expected, but with the quiet dignity of a soldier finally coming home. 6 months after that terrible night at the veterinary clinic, Michael sat in the garden of his father's ranch house, watching Sargent move slowly but steadily among the wildflowers that had taken root where lawn once grew. The German shepherd's recovery had been nothing short of miraculous, not because the poison had been fully purged from his system, but because he had finally found his purpose again. Dr. Webb's experimental treatment, combined with Michael's round-the-clock care, had given Sargent 6 additional months of life. More importantly, those months had allowed the dog to complete his final mission. Using Sargent's trained ability to locate specific scents and hidden caches, Michael had recovered evidence from 17 different locations across Colorado and Wyoming. The network his father had died fighting was finally exposed, brought down not by government agencies but by a dying dog's unwavering dedication to duty. The legal aftermath had been swift and devastating for the conspirators. Senator Richard Blackwood committed suicide in his Senate office the night before FBI agents arrived with warrants. General Patricia Hayes was found dead in her Pentagon office, an apparent heart attack brought on by the stress of knowing her crimes would soon be public. David Kowalski, finally free to tell the truth after 3 years of forced silence, testified before a closed congressional committee that his revelations would reshape how the military approached overseas humanitarian operations. Michael had chosen mercy over vengeance when it came to Derek Morrison's corporate betrayal. Instead of pursuing criminal charges, he used the evidence of Derek's fraud to reclaim Harrison Technologies, then immediately restructured the company around a new mission: developing technology to combat human trafficking and support military veterans. The IPO that had once represented personal enrichment became a funding mechanism for the Harrison Foundation, dedicated to continuing his father's work through legal channels. Sarah Martinez had become more than just the shelter director who had brought Sargent back into Michael's life. Their shared understanding of loss, her husband's death in Afghanistan, Michael's father's murder, had grown into something deeper and more healing than either had expected. They married in a simple ceremony at the ranch house, with Sargent serving as both ring-bearer and best man, his military bearing lending dignity to a celebration of new beginnings. The most profound transformation had occurred within Michael himself. The driven CEO who had measured success in quarterly profits now found meaning in smaller victories. Sargent's tail wagging when he managed a short walk, the thank you letters from families whose children had been rescued through the Foundation's work, the quiet satisfaction of sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. Dr. Chen had warned them that Sargent's reprieve was temporary. The organ damage was irreversible, and they were living on borrowed time. But those borrowed months had taught Michael lessons about love and loyalty that no business school could have provided. Watching Sargent adapt to civilian life while maintaining his military discipline showed Michael how to honor his father's memory without being destroyed by it. The final mission logs revealed the true scope of Colonel Harrison's sacrifice. Over 18 months, he and Sargent had documented evidence that led to the rescue of 437 children from trafficking networks across 6 countries. The financial cost had been his life savings, his health, and ultimately his life. But the human cost of doing nothing would have been measured in generations of stolen childhoods and broken families. Michael often found himself sitting in his father's study, reading letters from families whose children had been saved by operations they would never know about. Mothers in Afghanistan thanking an anonymous American soldier for returning their daughters. Fathers in Syria grateful for someone who had cared enough to risk everything for strangers' children. The letters painted a portrait of his father that Michael had never seen, not just as a soldier or counselor, but as a protector whose compassion transcended nationality, religion, and personal safety. Sargent's final day came with the peaceful dignity of a mission completed. The German shepherd had grown weaker throughout the week, but his spirits remained high, as if he knew his work was finished. Michael carried him to his favorite spot in the garden, where he could see both the mountains and the distant city lights, the two worlds Colonel Harrison had tried to bridge through his son. "You did good, old soldier," Michael whispered, his hand stroking Sargent's graying muzzle. "Dad would be proud of both of us." Sargent's blue eyes fixed on Michael's face one final time, and in that gaze, Michael saw not sadness, but satisfaction. The dog had completed his mission. The evidence was secure, the network was destroyed, and Colonel Harrison's son had finally understood what service really meant. With a gentle sigh that seemed to release years of held tension, Sargent closed his eyes and was gone. The funeral was private but profound. Military protocol demanded that working dogs be honored alongside their human partners, so Sargent was laid to rest beside Colonel Harrison in the Veterans Cemetery outside Denver. A small honor guard from his father's old unit attended, men who had finally learned the truth about their commander's secret final mission. David Kowalski spoke at the service, his voice breaking as he described Sargent's courage during their darkest operations. "Some soldiers fight for country, some fight for glory. David said, his words carrying across the autumn air. James Harrison and Sargent fought for children they would never meet, in places they could never speak of, for no reward except knowing they had done what was right. That's the highest form of service any warrior can achieve. Michael's transformation was complete but not finished. The Harrison Foundation grew beyond anything he had imagined, becoming a model for how private resources could support public good without political interference. The technology his company developed, secure communication networks for humanitarian organizations, tracking systems for missing children, PTSD treatment applications, proved that innovation could serve higher purposes than profit maximization. 5 years later, Michael would stand in that same garden with his infant daughter, telling her stories about the grandfather she would never meet and the brave dog who had brought their family together. The ranch house had become a sanctuary for other military working dogs in retirement, a place where heroes could spend their final years surrounded by understanding and respect rather than abandonment and neglect. The last file on his father's encrypted drive had been labeled "For Michael's Children," and it contained a simple message that became the Harrison family motto. Loyalty isn't just staying faithful to those who love you. It's staying faithful to those who need you, even when they can't love you back. Sarah would find Michael on quiet evenings sitting in his father's study, reading letters from families whose children had been saved by the Foundation's work. He never spoke about those moments, but his wife understood that he was maintaining a conversation with the dead, reporting on missions completed and promises kept. The network Colonel Harrison had died fighting was gone, dismantled through legal channels rather than vigilante justice. The children he and Sargent had saved were growing up free, many of them now adults with children of their own who would never know how close they had come to being lost forever. And sometimes, on clear mountain mornings when the light hit the garden just right, Michael could swear he saw two figures walking together among the wildflowers. A soldier and his dog, finally at peace, their mission accomplished and their sacrifice honored by those they had trusted to continue the fight. Sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as burdens, and the most profound love arrives when we least expect it. Michael Harrison's story reminds us that it's never too late to honor the sacrifices made by those who came before us, and that healing can happen even when we think we've missed our chance. Like so many of us who got caught up in the race for success, Michael almost missed the greatest gift his father left him, not money or property, but the opportunity to understand what true service really means. Sargent didn't just need a home, he needed someone worthy of completing the mission that defined his entire life. In caring for his father's loyal companion, Michael discovered that love isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by what we're willing to sacrifice for others. The bond between a soldier and his dog transcends death itself, carrying forward values of loyalty, courage, and unconditional love that our generation understands deeply. Sometimes God uses the most unlikely messengers to deliver His most important lessons about family, duty, and the legacy we leave behind. Have you ever discovered something about a loved one after they passed that completely changed how you saw them? What would you do if you found yourself caring for a beloved pet that held secrets about your family's past? Share your thoughts below. Your story might touch someone else's heart.